First off, my name is Kevin. I've been with HubSpot since December of 2020. I live in Maine, and my pronouns are he, him. Uh, Before we jump into some of the demonstrations I have set up for you, just want to talk a little bit about the troubleshooting mindset, go over some resources that I commonly use and a lot of my peers do as well, and then we'll have some time for some Q&A. When I talk about a troubleshooting mindset, there are so many different things in HubSpot. There are different tools, there are different areas, and it can be really overwhelming to say like, "Oh, I haven't done a lot of this before. I'm not sure how that tool works." The process for solving the problem is very consistent. The first thing I'm going to ask myself is, what did I want to have happen but didn't? Is something not set up correctly, or is something not working? I did a workflow not do what I expected it to do, or am I getting a lot of error messages? Can I not save something? Is something crashing? Um, Gives me a lot of direction on where to go. And then is there documentation on how this should work or how to fix this? So that troubleshooting mindset is working that problem and understanding what is the root cause of the issue, and do I understand what should have happened and didn't. Um, then I'll look at my resources. These are some of my top. These are by far my top 5 resources that I use. They're ones that are available to all customers. First and foremost, Google. Phenomenal. You could enter, a question. You can enter some keywords, add HubSpot to the end, and you're going to find a ton of resources from knowledge bases, community posts, our blog, on all things HubSpot. It's a great way to pull up our knowledge base and different kind of resources there to kind of look into the problem. HubSpot Academy, learn more about how the tools work. There's different processes, and I think that it's really important to understand. When I first started with HubSpot, was I don't know if this isn't working or if I just don't know how to use it. So take some HubSpot Academy courses that are free. It gives you a really good idea of like what the different processes might be, how a tool is intended to be used. And then once you understand that, then you can start to dig into, what might have happened or not. The knowledge base is invaluable in my opinion. There's so many times that I will reference that on a daily basis. Even in one of the examples I have for you today, I go to that knowledge base every single time I deal with a case on that topic. HubSpot Community Forum, I'm sure many of you have seen it. Many of you are probably participating in it. But a lot of times there can be some gray area of between, what the tool should do, what the knowledge base information has, but I might be in that gray area, or it's just not really telling me what the answer is. So I'll ask the community. If it's a question that is posted, a lot of times there's answers in there. If not, there's people talking about it. You can present ideas to HubSpot. Our product team does look at the ideas forum for future, development and features. And then HubSpot Developers Forum and Slack channel. Anytime we're dealing with third-party applications or third-party, development tools, APIs, where developing a website, we're using custom code, using webhooks, all sorts of different things that are kind of really at a developer's level. There are limitations to what we in support have exposure to. We're not professional developers. So, while we can troubleshoot and see kind of what we see on the HubSpot side of things, when it's external like that, working with a developer is really helpful. And whether you are a developer or not, joining some of those Slack channels or those forums, you can get a lot of information and answers from. All right, let's troubleshoot. So I'm going to exit out of this slide and jump into my test portal and kind of just talk a little bit about I did some things the other day and last night, and I have created a bit of a mess. The first thing, we're going to kind of focus on 2 key areas, and they all kind of center around the CRM side of HubSpot. One of the most important things that I can't stress enough to customers is the importance of, good data. And what I mean by good data is that it's set up properly, it's formatted, and there's a lot of ways that data can get unclean. whether it's from a bad import, we had a workflow that went awry and did the wrong thing. We've got forms coming in, all sorts of different stuff. But keeping a clean database really is going to make your life easier. And reporting is another area I can think of that can go awry as well when, there's records not showing on a report or the report doesn't seem accurate. More often than not, it's within the data, which is what the reports are pulling from. There's a lot of integrations that I could recommend to help clean up data. So if you're in that process of, I have a mess and how do I fix it? Some issues you can really handle inside of HubSpot itself, but there's an integration called in-cycle data management that I recommend all the time, especially because it's got flexible filtering and you can kind of address some of the issues that can't be automated or can't be done in like a quick, click of a button inside of HubSpot. But I digress. So I've got a bunch of, issues in here. I completed an import that kind of went awry again last night. So what I can start to do is say, okay, here are the records that were imported. I've got, I know this person, Coach Beard, does not work for Coach Beard FC. He works for Richmond FC. So what happened there? I've got duplicate records. I've got, 2 Ron Swansons. I've got 2 Saul Goodmans. I've got, just people not associated with the right things. And again, it came from a bad import. So if I jump into the import tool has gotten really elegant, I'd say over the last couple of years. It's really easy to look into some of these and understand what happened and then find out how to fix. More often than not, the solution is to complete the import again, but you first want to understand what was wrong with the import. So if I took my FKO Boston VIP list, I brought in 7 new records, I updated 4 of them, but I've got 20 errors. Okay, so if I click into here, the tool is going to let me look at what the error was, what records it affected, and it's going to highlight. This is kind of almost like a preview of the file that was used, and it's going to show me where all of my errors occurred. And what I can start to do is say, what happened? I'm Kevin. I was on the file. Why did it not find the owner? So what's that mean? If I click here, it's going to bring me to a small viewpoint of the knowledge base. I can always open it into a full tab and could not find owner. Well, it means that it could not find the formatting of it. It has to be very specific. If the person you want to assign records to is not yet a user, add them. If they are, it has to match what it says in the account. So without jumping around to too many screens, I know for a fact that my user, the owner, is listed in HubSpot in my account as Kevin M. So I would go through each of these, update the file, and complete a new import. And that would, update all of those. A common one we see is the enumeration value. It's kind of an interesting, enumeration. What does that mean? A lot of times it means, that there's a property that has multiple values that you can select from, and it essentially can't find that value. It doesn't exist. So again, go back to your file, update the file, complete that import again, and you can get that corrected. Again, one resource that I use all the time when I'm looking at imports, and again, I do this when I complete my own imports for testing. I do it when I'm working with customers, but I will look at HubSpot import file setup. This resource is going to tell me, what are the property requirements? If I have a property that, has multiple values, how do I have to format that file so it comes through that property? My favorite thing of this knowledge base article, sample import files. I don't understand how my import file is different. Well, I can look at one object. I can look at multiple objects with different associations, and I can quickly download these. I'll use these as a template to build my own, or at least compare how should that have been formatted. and then go from there. But as you can see, there's a lot of different things that came through here and a lot of different ways to resolve them. But again, I'm looking at what was the root cause of my import not bringing all the information in. A common thing I've seen as of late with imports specifically is a company was brought in, but was on the import file, but was never created. This invalid domain, a lot of times, especially if we're coming from a different database or a different platform and we're exporting data, that database might have a different formatting for a company's domain. And one of the things that you'll see here is that at pawneeparksdepartment.com. Well, that's not a company domain. The company domain would be pawneeparks.com. So the import tool couldn't bring that record in at all. Again, going back into the file, adjusting it, bringing it back in, everything can kind of get resolved. But what I'm doing here is I'm really looking at what was the root cause of the error, or of the issue, which the issue was I imported the file of records. I got a bunch of stuff that's not import that didn't come along with it. And I've got a bunch of errors when I look at the import history. So I'm going to start to work backwards, use my resources to get to the root cause, which in this case, again, formatting, and go ahead and reprocess the import. Another thing that I commonly run into, I think we've all had, sometimes a workflow doesn't do what we want it to do. So again, I created a couple of examples here of workflows that really didn't work like you would think they would. It was an interesting exercise because I'm usually making things work. So making things not work as you would expect was an interesting exercise for me on this. But a couple examples here. This is a very common one. I want to enroll a company into a workflow, and I want to copy a property value from the company record to the contact record, or vice versa. But the one thing to know with workflows, when I start to troubleshoot them, is they are very, very literal. They will do exactly what you tell them to do. They will not take into context what your ultimate goal is. They're going to do what they're being told. So the first thing I do, if it's records weren't enrolled, well, let's look at the enrollment trigger. The enrollment trigger, when you think of a enrollment trigger, think of it as a key to a house. You can't get into the house without the key. Some keys are very, very basic. Some have a lot of little different notches in them. So whenever you're using filter criteria with and, it's going to look for any record that hits every single one of these filter types. If you've got or, then you're creating more variables. It's going to look for different types of records that match different types of criteria. But that's the first thing I'll look at. And then I'll look at what is the goal of the workflow. Well, in this case, again, I wanted the workflow to enroll records and copy the street address from the company record to the contact property of the associated records. So if I look at the details, in my scenario, I've got 2 records that enrolled, but I've got probably 7 or 8 company records that should have gone in there. Okay, well, it's a very common thing. Not every record that I expected to come through the workflow went through the workflow. So what I'll start to do is look at the history of the workflow. When was it changed? What's the root cause of this? Why would 2 records be enrolled, but not every record that I expect to come through the workflow be enrolled? If I click on changes, it's going to show me all the different event types. You can filter that down. What happened when I turned it on? Oh, I did not enroll existing contacts or existing companies right then and there. So when I want to then go to how do I fix that, or how does that happen? How do you enroll existing contacts? Again, I'm going to jump over to Google and I'm going to say enroll existing contacts, HubSpot workflow. And I'm going to understand what prompts me to be able to do that. And I'll look through some of here. Can I enroll existing contacts? These are already meet the trigger and criteria. Do you want to enroll them when you turn it on? So really the only way in this case is when you turn the workflow on. My favorite kind of solution, just like anything, have you tried turning it on and off? would be the answer here. I would turn off the workflow. I would refresh my page. And then I see that review and publish, which is needed to review the workflow and look for existing contacts that meet the criteria. And I can click yes. And I don't have to really wait for this to refresh because I know that's going to be the case. And turn it on. Resolved. But the thing with workflows that are neat, again, that because they're so literal, you really can work backwards in a lot of ways to understand what you're trying to do, what caused it, how did it start. There's a timeline of everything that happens in a workflow, again, through the details. I can look at enrollment history. When did records get enrolled? Why did they get enrolled? Did they meet the criteria? Were they manually enrolled? Did they re-enroll? All sorts of different information here. I can look at the action logs. So it tells me what happened. When a record was enrolled, what action it took, the timestamp, etc. Which kind of leads me into the other workflow that I had, which is, oops, sorry, wrong workflow. That was the same one we just covered. If I want to understand branches, and if-then branches are fantastic. They're great to have in a workflow. They can get a little confusing because you got to think of what's the journey of the record through the workflow, but still not. You're going to take the same approach to looking at this as you would anything else. What brings a record into the workflow? There's a deal that's in a specific pipeline, a contact through a form submission. Okay, so that's what brings them in. So if the issue in this case would be not that they weren't enrolled, but it's that they didn't go down the right branch. So I'm going to look at this again in the same way I looked at the enrollment trigger and say, what is the criteria for these branches? Well, it needs to have the amount of the deal known and get a demo is equal to any of yes. And if they don't meet that criteria, then they go to move deal to lost and it goes away. But in between here, we're seeing that there's a task that needed to be created or completed. So if that task was completed, then the criteria would have been set for the branch. If we go back into details, and again, I'm going to look at, what happened here. Cramerica was enrolled. The task was created. It went down the branch and it left the workflow all within about 1 minute. But if the information, but I still don't have the, it didn't go down the right branch, then why this branch? Well, time, it didn't meet the criteria. I see this a lot with if-then branches that are based on actions being taken by team members. So if I were to look at, the timeline of when the record went through, what action was taken, it didn't meet the criteria. I'm going to look at the record itself. And I see that there's an amount. I see that it matches the criteria for the first branch, but it still didn't go through. So why? Well, let's look at the timestamps. The amount was updated on 4/2, but it went through on April 1st. So I didn't, in this case, and again, I see it a lot. We didn't give the person completing the task, which shows completed, enough time to complete the task and update the record before it went through the workflow. So again, it's working kind of through the journey of the workflow, what should have happened, what happens next. And again, the workflow is literal. It's not going to take into context that we're creating a task that a human being has to complete. I'm just going to enroll it and I'm going to take it to the next action, and then I'm going to complete that action. And it is trying to be as efficient as it possibly can. So it's, one of those common things that I see, but again, understanding what happened in the workflow is looking through the history of the workflow, looking through the journey that the record took versus the journey you wanted it to take, and then trying to understand, ways that you can adjust that. So again, if I wanted to fix this, I would say, let's give my team member time to complete the task before I ask the workflow to check that information was updated. So I could go in and I could say, let's add a delay, and we're going to say a set amount of time, and we're going to give them 2 days. So now any record that comes through would go through the same process. It would create that task. My team member would have 2 days. So as soon as the workflow hits here, it's going to go to this action, and it's going to wait for 48 hours. It's going to start the clock when it hits that action. After 2 days, it's going to immediately look to see if the information was updated and if it meets the criteria for the branch. Kevin, I had two records went through. How do I get them to go back through and have it properly, set for a new task? Can I just enroll them here? Well, no. And there's information on how to look through that. Again, that'd be something I would Google. Like, can I enroll a record to a specific action in HubSpot? What happens if I've already had a record go through? In this case, I don't have to necessarily turn the workflow off, but I could say I'm going to manually put those deals back through. So I can look up here and say, Cramerica, enroll, and it will instantly start working on that. If I wanted to say, let's have Vandelay go through as well, for all those Seinfeld fans, and you can kind of resolve it that way. But again, the solution came from me trying to look at what is the root cause, what did I want to have happen, what did actually happen, and then what are my resources to learn about the tool or learn about possible ways of fixing it. And again, I personally love workflows. They're one of my favorite things to work on when helping customers, because they're so literal, and you can really, you can follow the journey of a record. You can understand what they're trying to do, how to do them. There are definitely some complex situations where we're trying to, especially in this case, I'm trying to, copy a property. I'm trying to use the associated contacts information to enroll someone into a deal-based, workflow. Some things aren't available. Some properties can't be used, things like that, which leads me into kind of talking a little bit about the CRM. Kind of has 3 primary components, and I actually have a visual I'm hoping I can pull up to show. Let me unshare my screen for just a moment. And I share this because there's a lot of different types of ways to look at how the CRM works, how these all, especially with workflows, and it's a little bit easier when you look at this. I'm not sure if everybody can see the chart that I'm doing.
Yep. The pyramid.
Yeah. So this is kind of what I call like the hierarchy of our CRM. So, Kevin, we've got contacts and they're associated to companies, and all this information should be shared, right? Like I've got, Joe Smith I got Cosmo Kramer connected to, Cramerica. Don't those 2 records communicate? It's in the same CRM. It's in the same account. It's a little bit different. So there's, the breakdown is there's, at the top of the pyramid, there's objects, and those represent relationships, processes. Objects are deals, contacts, tickets, companies, all the different areas of your of HubSpot. When you look at like objects, in the sense, that's what those are. And inside each object, there are records. Again, a single instance of that object, and that those records store information, track interactions, things like that. And then we've got properties, and those are the different fields, obviously, that we store within records, within objects, that help us kind of, keep different information and, identify. I share all this because it can easily get confusing when I'm trying to copy a property and it doesn't match, or I don't see something in a record that I'm expecting to see because it's on the company record, things like that. So I just want to share that really quickly, just to kind of go, when we talk about objects, we talk about records, especially when you're going into building a workflow and you've got a deal-based workflow, you've got a ticket-based workflow, a contact-based workflow, a company-based workflow. The based part of that is where is the workflow pulling the majority of the information from? it's really going to take action on the object. The object is the company, and then inside there, the records that are associated in the properties. And another thing that, to consider when looking at different associations, like I mentioned before, I see this a lot. I've got Coach Beard, who, there's this random company that was created. Coach Beard, that's his email address, but that's not who he works for. That's not the company. The company he should be associated with. What happened here? Within a contact record, you can look at the details and the history and understand, like, what created this association. So if I jump into the association history, any object that this record is associated with, this is a contact object. I can look at company objects, I can look at deals, but if I look at companies, it's going to show that it was associated with this object or this company record through a portal setting. Well, what does that setting mean? It's a really useful one, but it can sometimes cause some issues, which is it creates and associate companies with contacts. If one doesn't exist, it'll create it. And again, much like deduplication works, it's going to match the contact to a company based on the domain. So if I were to jump back to Coach Beard, when I created this contact, I created it with his personal email address by accident. But as soon as I created that record, I added the work email address, the one that I wanted them connected with. But because our system works so quickly, the minute that I created the record, the system then used the feature to identify that what company should Coach Beard be connected to? Well, we can't find that record, so we're going to create one. Now, again, can I make this primary? Sure, but it won't change. I'm not seeing that if I refresh that the primary company's changed. So what I would do here, much like I have before, is going, what is the issue? I thought I fixed it. I made the primary email address, Coach Beard at rfcfootball.com. I refreshed the page, but wait, he's still connected to coachbeardrfc.com, the wrong one. So I'm going to go and I'm going to look up automatic association HubSpot. My search history is full of HubSpot, which is nice too, but okay, automatically create. So I want to understand what this tool does more. I thought I had it set up right. It's turned on. It's got the email address, the domains match an existing company record, but it still didn't now change. So I'll look through, understand it. With it turned on, what does it do? Automatic association will not occur in following scenarios. So reading through this, I can quickly see that if a contact has an associated company that is different from their email address domain, the setting will not override the existing association. Okay, so I need to go and manually move this. So I can remove this association, and I can look for Richmond FC and save. Now it's connected to the right one. This is the association piece is another part of our CRM that can get really kind of tricky because associations aren't necessarily an object. They're kind of a bridge to objects. So correcting these can get tricky at times, which is why I brought up earlier in-cycle data management. It is, if you've got, I had one record that I had to fix. If I had 10,000 records, manually going in and fixing that is going to be a problem. It's going to take a lot of time. So I've looked up data management, integrations with HubSpot, and this is the one that I recommend the most, and why I'm sharing it, because it's affordable to, for the pricing. There's over 6,000 installs, and it's very, very flexible. But what this integration would do, because this is a way to solve the problem, because at this point I can either go through 10,000 records and manually adjust the associations, or I could use in-cycle to set flexible filtering. Maybe I create a list of those records. Maybe I've got a way to identify them specifically, or I can use their flexible associating and start to fix it. Basically, in-cycle will fix data integrity. It's phenomenal. it's something I highly recommend. Fixing bad data. That's the biggest thing that I look at when I was looking at this initially. But again, it goes back to the root cause. We've gone through some workflows, we've gone through some records. I've got some bad data. So this would be kind of that, high level, the entire, CRM kind of solution that I would put in place there. But again, we've fixed a couple of issues so far. We've, adjusted some associations from a record that was, the data was incorrectly entered. We've looked at how to look at imports. We've looked at workflows. But again, at the end of the day, what I'm trying to always do is identify what is my root problem. What am I trying to solve for? Did it, is it broken, or is it just not set up correctly or formatted correctly? What are my resources? And from there, trying to work through the problem. And honestly, knowing how the tool works really helps you understand what might have happened. But there's a lot of information within the history of workflows, the property histories within a record, understanding, what an association is compared to the different objects. There's a lot of different ways you can kind of jump into these things. But again, it's that troubleshooting mindset. Again, what was the goal? What was I trying to do? What is it currently doing? Is it set up, or is it, got a lot of errors? And start to kind of work through it from there and identify, once you understand what caused the issue, then you can look at ways of resolving it. And with that, I'm going to kind of turn it over to Kyle, and we can do some Q&A.
Great. Thank you so much. This has been really great. Lots of positive things in the chat. If you want to scroll through and see what's going on there. Everyone, if you want to move over to the Q&A tab and upvote your favorite questions, we will work through them most popular to least popular. But I'll give you all, 15 seconds to look through and vote.
I feel like we need theme music for when you say that, so that I'll work on that.
Does Bevy let you share sound? It has to be in a tab. All right. Well, that's a little tricky. But
only there was a way to share that.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sorting questions now by most upvoted. Our most popular question, Kevin, is, can you show us all your secret HubSpot tools so we can know what kind of mistakes you can fix that we can't? Smiley face.
I can't necessarily show them, but I can certainly go into some examples of when, I think that's another question too, is when should I reach out to HubSpot support? When should I not? And I would always say there is no such thing as a silly question. Reach out to us anytime. That's what we're here for. Our goal in support is to help you get the most out of the products that you're using, to empower you to understand how to resolve something or how to use a tool differently or to get more out of it. So always reach out to us. My hope today was to kind of just take you through like a little bit of what we do. If someone sends us an email or chats with us or calls us, the approach that we're taking that I showed today is what we're doing. We're using a lot of these public resources. We're thinking about what is the cause, how is it supposed to work? What are the different ways to resolve it? There are times though when I would say definitely reach out to us. One example I can think of is when we've created a list and it had 10,000 people on it, and then all of a sudden there are 5 people on the list. We do have tools that will allow us to go into the back end of that list and look at enrollment, criteria history, were the filters changed, who changed them, what was the list size on April 1st? What is it on April 2nd? We have a lot of access to certain APIs that can let us look at, user information. When there's an engagement, an email was logged on a contact record, we can look on the back end. We can't see a lot with the email specifically, but we can see what IP address did it come in from, when was it logged, different kind of pieces of that information there to kind of give you more of a journey and sense to it. I think that there are also times where we're limited. So one way that we're limited would be we don't have access to reset people's passwords on their behalf. There are certain things that support just doesn't have access to because we want to protect your data and your information and, privacy. So, a lot of times if it's a two-factor authentication, I'm supposed to get a code to log in, but I don't get that code or I need to reset it. We're absolutely able to help reset them, but we can't go in and tell you what your backup codes are. We can't tell you what your password is. We can't initiate the reset for you. If you usually get your two-factor code sent to you by text, I can't change it to email. It's just one of those things we don't have access to. Reach out to us. We can help work with you to verify the account and reset it. But a common question is, can't you just change my password for me or give it to me? It's like, I don't have access to that. A lot of the tools that we'll have will be kind of back-end, like API-based, data. When you logged in, we have a record of that. We can see when you logged in, how you logged in, kind of things like that. I wish I could show you because they're cool. But we do kind of have to keep those a little close to the chest.
Cool. Thanks for that. Sarah asks, what's the best way to keep workflows organized? I utilize folders and naming the workflows heavily, but I feel like at the end of the day, the information just lives in my brain, and therefore only one person should be in charge of workflows.
Gotcha. I would say, I've started using, even myself, if you go into workflows now and you click on the title, leave a description. And there's an AI generative to describe what the workflow does, because it'll pull, enrollment triggers and actions and guess what it is. But I would say, don't have the same title for 6 different workflows. Make them, very identifiable. Whenever I go into a account, if I'm helping look at a workflow and I need to clone it, I will make it very obvious that it's a HubSpot support test or it's a different workflow. So I think the titling is really important. And inside there, you can put a description. And, like I said, you can use the AI piece, but just at the end of the day, what is that workflow doing? Is the workflow updating a matching record? Is the workflow sending marketing emails to customers who file the form? Put that description in there and have it very clearly titled. I think even when you go into folders and you've got campaign for 6 different workflows, it's really tricky to know which one they are. So being as descriptive as possible is great.
Great. Thank you. Maggie asks, is there a way for super admins to be notified of import errors for an import executed by another user?
I believe, and again, I would, if I was sharing my screen, I would Google. I believe with that notifications, I believe you can be notified of an import completed, but it's not granular enough to say, here was an import completed that has errors. I think notifications and specifics to that, especially with admins, it's, a great idea and things that we could always suggest. But I don't believe that is possible right now. I would have to do some research on that.
Yeah, I don't know of a way to do it off the top of my head either. But if anyone has clever ideas, chime in the chat. Gina asks, is it possible to fix the error directly within the errors view, I think, of the import tool instead of redoing the import?
Gotcha. It's not possible to do it from within there. Reason being, when you complete the import, the import tool is set to read information off of a file and create records or update records. So all you're looking at in the import history is just the history of the import. It's not enabling you to go in and redo it. What you can do is you can go and complete a previous import again, which is kind of nice because it does save you a lot of the mapping, challenges and kind of doing the initial setup. If you're in the import history, you can hover over an import, you can click more, and say use as template for new import, and it'll kind of keep the same structure. And then all you have to do is just upload your updated file. So
yeah, and one thing that's nice too, when you're in the import, and you have your spreadsheet uploaded, it'll tell you if there are going to be errors. And a lot of those you can fix in line. If you have a list of locations and in your property for state or region or whatever province, it's fully spelled out, but in your spreadsheet, it's an abbreviation. It won't be able to map it, but you can tell it, CA is short for California or whatever. And then it'll still run the import. You don't have to go fix your spreadsheet and pull it in. Some of the other things you were showing, Kevin, like in the domain field, you have a thing that is not a domain. I think you're really going to have to go fix your spreadsheet in that instance and re-upload it. But you can do this before the import is fully processed and all those errors are.
Yeah, absolutely. It's there's a proactive approach when you're in the import process and you're through the map. The tool will say, hey, I'm giving you a heads up, like this doesn't look right. Some errors you can't even complete the import with, but some will still let you do it. It's more of a just letting you know. So there's a proactive approach there. And then, of course, when you're in the import history, it's reactive. A common thing I see when you're completing the import is, I've caught myself doing this, is I want to update records with the record ID, and I'm trying to map it to the record ID property for a contact, and it doesn't work because it's not used as a unique identifier in that case. So, it'll flag it. It'll say, hey, there's no unique identifier for this file. I'm like, well, wait a second. I've got the record ID there, and I have to look at the error message on the mapping portion of the import tool, and I can go, oh, I didn't set that up right. Now I did. Now it will let me continue. But great call, Kyle. Yeah, there's a lot of times you can catch these issues before you complete the import, which I always say is it's always easier to what's the old phrase? Cut, measure twice, cut once.
Yeah.
Double check the file formatting before you click import, but it can be fixed after.
Great.
There are a few things that can't be fixed in HubSpot. That's the thing to remember.
Yeah.
When that started was there are very, 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 very few things that we can't find a solution to. Some are a little more tricky than others, but there is a solution to most, I'd say 99% of the things that happen inside of an account.
Yeah. Have a few more minutes. We will get through as many of these questions as we can, but we are definitely not going to get through them all. Neil asks, within our initial imports, there were multiple duplicates created, both companies and contacts. Without having to go one by one in the data quality dedupe exercise, what's the best way to remove duplicates from multiple imports without having to delete everything and re-import everything?
So that's an interesting thing where I would say reach out to us, because there is an option within support, and it's kind of a new thing that we have access to for a tool, but we have the ability with certain types of imports to roll it back. A lot of the times in my experience, you can roll back an import that created a ton of new records. And if they're duplicates, you can say, no, I didn't want to do that. That was a mistake. I don't want that to happen. Reach out to support and we can identify that import and we can roll it back. So there's one way of approaching it that way. The other, a lot of duplicate records, it depends on how they're duplicated. And some of the examples that I showed today, like I had Tom Haverford with an email address, and then below was a second email address because I meant it to be Tom's secondary email address. So that was in the formatting. So, you can do a merging of records. The dedupe tool can, again, at the scale of the number of records you're trying to correct, if you've got 10,000 records that you need to go through and monitor, I would encourage looking at something like InCycle Data Management. It's a great integration for just that kind of thing. It can deduplicate. Sometimes if you complete an import without email addresses or domains, the import tool is one of the only things that will create a record, regardless if there's an email address or domain associated with it. And you can set specific filtering for something like that. But great. I hope that answered your question there.
Yeah. I think we'll do one more. Yep. Sarah asks, we have inboxes connected to our support emails to have more visibility on what customers are emailing about. We found that when emails get forwarded, or depending on how the email came in, HubSpot is creating our own employees as contacts, and tickets are being associated to our company rather than the customer. How can we tell HubSpot that's us without adding our domain to the block list, which in turn logs our own emails as spam? That's a complicated one.
That is a tricky one. And I say that because, again, I have not worked in the conversations inbox for a couple days or this week yet. I would need to look into that. I don't want to say that it's not possible or it's an easy fix, but I think there's a way to do that. And a lot of that becomes, especially when you start forwarding emails, there's associations and creation of records, because there's, anytime an email is sent, there's a tracking code that's embedded into the email. So if you forward it, it's going to continue to track. And if there are new email addresses added to that, it tells the system, hey, this email is new, create a new record for it. There are ways around it, but I would say that's a little more of a complex issue. But
Yeah.
definitely
Sarah, call in
reach
support.
out to us. Yeah, reach out to us. And I would say for that, maybe call us or request a call back if you have that option, because a screen share would be a fantastic way to troubleshoot that.
Great. Well, Kevin, thanks so much for being here, for answering all these questions, for sharing your knowledge. If folks want to connect with you, are you on LinkedIn? Do you have a preferred method for?
I am on LinkedIn, so you should be able to find me there. And then if not, hopefully I'll see you on a support ticket. I love it.
Amazing.
Yeah, if anybody wants to connect, by all means.
Yeah, perfect. Well, thank you so much, everybody. There's a survey in the chat. If you could give us feedback on this session, we'd love to hear what you thought of it. Kevin, thanks again for being here. This is fantastic.
Thank you.
And hope to see you all back again next week.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks, everybody.
See you guys
Bye.
next Tuesday.